what we want to do from here is just introduce a lot of the hot topics and questions that have been posed along the way as the committee has continued to move forward and research this topic. And so at this point, we really want to open it up to the full panel. I'll introduce a question, and please feel free for anyone who wants to participate in the discussion to please do so. And so the first question I want to bring out, and I'll start this with you, Craig, is just for people who may be learning about this for the first time through this discussion here today. Talk about whether there might be some people out there wondering, is this already a done deal? Is the school prepared to move forward with this now? Talk about that aspect of it and maybe the timeline moving forward for how you expect this to potentially roll out.
Okay. No, it's not a done deal. I think the work of the committee and the recommendation from our perspective is that, we're going to recommend a later start time for middle school and for the high school. But this still, it has to be voted on by school committee. We still have some conversations to engage in with the high school folks and the middle school people, but not to forget the elementary folks either. There are some contractual issues around changing start times too. Our teachers have designated start times right in their contract, and other staff members too. TAs and librarians and so forth. So we'd have to probably open up the contracts of all of our employees and see if we can work that out with them. We still have, as everyone has said, some barriers to talk about with athletics. And I think beyond scheduling games, I think it's a conversation that we have to have with some of the districts in the Hockomock League, which coincidentally, there's a bunch of school districts in the Hockomock who are kind of in the same boat that we are. May not have made a decision, but I think for us, if we're going to start talking about changing, and other schools in the Hockomock are talking about changing, that's only good news for us. That could take care of that roadblock right there. I believe that's kind of where we're at right now. I can't remember if there's really anything else that we have to discuss besides those kinds of things.
And so you bring up a pretty interesting point with other schools, not only within the athletic division that Milford plays in, but just sort of schools in the area. And Len, I believe you were actually talking a little bit about this before we started here today, that Franklin schools had just recently held a discussion talking about this as well. What sort of contact have you had with other schools that have maybe either already implemented a change or are considering a change, and what's the feedback been like within other districts that have been proposing these kind of changes?
Well, last year I was at a MAPT meeting. It's a transportation state board that we belong to, and Lexington did a presentation on changing their time, which they have done successfully. In other districts, there were 2 other districts there, Canton, I don't remember exactly the third one, and they all, successfully made the changes. And they told us about the roadblocks that they were fighting. I brought that back to our committee. I think one of the biggest things is what we're doing right now, is let the public know what's out there so that we can get their feedback. We did it through a questionnaire. We're doing it through a forum like this, and I know we have some other things planned along the way. But as far as the roadblocks go, with one of the things being hot topic sports, as Craig said, a lot of the Hockomock teams are looking at it as many schools in Massachusetts are looking at it. So it's not like an isolated thing. And I predict in a few years a lot of schools will be going this way. Right. Or if they're not in discussions, they will be in discussions with changes.
And I also think it depends on which stakeholders you talk to at those different school districts. For example, in Ashland, Ashland just switched, I think they're in their second year. They switched their high school to 8:20. And if I speak to the superintendent, the assistant superintendent, they say it's the best decision that's ever been made. However, I'm sure if you talk to some parents or teachers, they'll have a different perspective on it. So there's going to be just varying degrees of either agreement, disagreement, it doesn't matter who you talk to. But I think the research is clear that it's the right thing to do.
Do you get the sense that this is maybe the wave of the future? Milford's a little bit on the front end of it, but is this something that, as we go along, is possibly going to become more common with districts across the state?
Yeah, I say, like you said, we're on the front end of it, but there's certainly a lot of communities around us that are having these same discussions. Franklin's an example. They had a forum last night. I know Grafton's involved with it, but there's a number of other communities as well. And I think if everybody gets on the same page and ends up shifting, then the things that we're talking about just become irrelevant because it'll be the norm.
As we continue to talk about the sort of medical aspect of this and the studies that have shown that these later times will help kids with sort of their natural body chemistry at this point in their lives, when you take that into consideration, are there any concerns that with a later start time, you're certainly giving students the extra sleep in the front end of the day, but maybe by shifting the end times of everything down and assignments at the end of the day, do things maybe end up evening out in the end where kids are going to sleep later, getting up later, and it ends up being maybe a little bit of a lateral move? Has there been any discussion about that?
Two things that you have to remember is one is that all the adolescents, all the teenagers benefit from a move like this, and we have to remember that part of it, and we have to remember that the times that they are able to go to sleep is very, very important. And if they can't go to sleep at a certain time, then it's wasted time anyway. So it's important that we try to adapt to their biology than it is to whatever our needs are. I know there's an awful lot of sacrifice that's going to have to go on with this, but the important thing is we're benefiting all the teenagers, and I think for that reason, I really believe that all schools are going to change. This is going to change. It may not be today or tomorrow, but or even in my lifetime. But it's all going to change, and the schools are going to start later, and the later the better. For the you had mentioned, Doctor, about the development of the teenage brain, and if you just think of just that, and the fact that changing the start time might help them not to use drugs, not to smoke, not to use alcohol, how we can have an impact, even if it's on one child, on their developing brain. Isn't that a reason to do it? You know?
And the research shows that when, sort of for all of us, not just for adolescents, but getting a good night's sleep makes you less likely to take risks, makes you, sort of benefits you in a whole host of ways, but one of the things is that you're less likely to take risks. Some of the research that we have looked at has addressed your question about, are they, they don't have to get up as early, so do they just stay up later? And what the studies have shown is that they may be staying up like 10, 15 minutes longer, but they're not staying up significantly later. So it really doesn't seem to change the time that they're able to fall asleep, because like you said, they're ready to fall asleep. The melatonin has kicked in and they're settling down, and that they're actually getting more hours of sleep with the delayed start. They're not staying up later.
Jim, you have a current Milford High School student yourself who is heavily involved in athletics and activities throughout the school. Just sort of thinking about, I know he's obviously ready to head off to college next year, but just sort of looking at what his schedule is typically like now, if these changes were to be implemented, do you feel like that's something that would benefit a student who is as involved in those activities later on in the school day as someone like Josh is?
Actually, I do, yeah. I mean, when I was actually just thinking about that when we were talking about it, looking at the difference between, Josh's sleep patterns and even Jake's, who's going to be a freshman next year, they're both significantly different. My youngest actually tends to go right to bed at 9 o'clock, and I don't know if that's just habitual for him or not. Josh has always been the antithesis of that, so he is up, he is the quintessential, teenager. He's up till 11. He's up till 11:15, 11:30. Those seem to be his peak hours. And when he goes to bed, I'm not quite sure, to Craig's point, that he's not still, somewhat active. So I'm not quite sure when he's falling asleep, and he does fall into a typical pattern where he does sleep longer in the morning, and to everyone's point that has an adolescent, it's very difficult to get them up and motivated. And then comparing him to my youngest from a personal perspective, Jacob is up and out of the house much earlier, much more effectively than Josh. No offense, Josh, but that's typically how we see it going, and I feel like he's a lot more of the norm than not.
This is Milford TV News and Sports Director Tim Coet. Make sure you check out new editions of the Milford Informer every Friday at 7:30 p.m. or during one of our 8 convenient re-air times throughout the weekend. You can also find individual news stories as well as full archived editions on our YouTube page, My Milford TV. If you live in the greater Milford area and have an idea for a news story, you can tweet at us using the handle @Milford_TV, or you can contact me directly by sending an email to news@milfordtv.net.